Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. Let's extend a warm welcome to Dr. Sven Nyholm as he joins us on our podcast. Dr. Sven is a professor of ethics of artificial intelligence, principal investigator of AI ethics at the Munich Center for Machine Learning, and co-editor of Science and Engineering Ethics. His research and teaching focus on applied ethics, particularly the ethics of artificial intelligence, practical philosophy, and the philosophy of technology. Currently, he is working on his fourth book, which will explore the ethics of AI. His previous works have examined Kantian ethics, the ethics of human-robot interactions, and the ethics of technology. Dr. Sven received his PhD from the University of Michigan and holds a BA in philosophy and music, as well as MA in practical philosophy. In this episode, Dr. Sven Nyholm shares valuable insights from his book, This is Technology Ethics, an Introduction. Dr. Sven Nyholm, it is an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Yeah. Dr. Sven, what inspired you to write This is Technology Ethics, and how do you think the book addresses the growing need for discussions on the ethical implications of emerging technologies?
Well, actually, those are two parts of the questions, in a certain sense, fit very nicely together, because I think there is a growing need and there's a growing interest. And so, what inspired me to write the book was partly that I was invited to write it. I was contacted by, there's a series of philosophy books that is called This is Philosophy. And so you have this is metaphysics, this is the history of philosophy, this is ancient philosophy, and so on. And then they wanted one called This is Technology Ethics. And that has to do with the fact that people are becoming more and more aware that the artificial intelligence and robots and other types of technologies, machine learning, etc., is raising all sorts of ethical issues, and also more broadly philosophical issues. I mean, what does it mean to be a human being in a world where we're not the only entities that speak, that produced language and text? Cicero, the ancient Roman philosopher, used to say that what's special about people is that we can speak, we can reason. It makes us almost divine. But now we have, we have ChatGPT, we have Claude, we have Gemini and other types of AI technologies that can also speak in a sense. So the question then arises, does that make them also almost divine? Or should we maybe change our view about what's special about being a human being? So on the one hand, you have, questions about, which technology should we allow? Should we ban maybe? What about automated weapon systems? Is that too hard to say who's responsible, and is that too dangerous? But on the other hand, we also have this more existential questions about, what does it mean to be a human in a world with talking computers, etc. So that was all part of what inspired me to write this book.
In your book, you discuss whether technologies are value-neutral tools. Could you explain what that means and provide examples of how human values or prejudices can be embedded in technologies?
Absolutely. So like if you think about, if you have a book that's called This is Technology Ethics, then on the one hand, you want to explain, what is technology and what is ethics? And then you want to put those two ideas together to get the idea of technology ethics. And so in the very first chapter of the book, I start with the question, okay, what do we mean by technology here? And one of the first things that comes to mind for a lot of people, especially if you come from an engineering background, is, okay, well, technology is a tool. We find ourselves with certain kinds of problems, and we want to find tools that we can use to solve the problem. And then, well, a technology is one of these tools that we create for ourselves. It could be, it could be a pen, it could be a frying pan, it could be a computer, it could be a car that could solve the problem of, being able to write something down to get from A to B, or from preparing some food, etc. And from that point of view, a technology is always a means to an end. A human being has a goal, and they're looking around for what kind of tools or what kind of means they can use to get to their goal. And the tool itself is that doesn't really have any value baked into it, so to speak, that the values come from human beings. That's the idea that a lot of people have. However, a lot of people studying technology have noticed that depending on what technologies people have, they will think in different ways. They will see the world in different ways. They will be inspired to act in different ways. I mean, to just go to a slightly basic example, such as the frying pan, if I don't have a frying pan, I'm not going to be able to to fry any food. If I want to prepare an egg, I'm going to have to boil it, or do some other method of preparing the egg. So if I have a frying pan, I could make some scrambled eggs, or whatever kind of egg you might like to prepare. So what kind of actions are open to me is going to depend on what tools I have, but also what kind of actions occur to me is going to depend on the tool. So if I have a gun, I'm being attacked, well, then I might think, well, I can defend myself. I can shoot the attacker, so to speak. And suddenly I become, Americans sometimes use the expression a gunman, a person with a gun, an active shooter, people talk about these days. Well, if I don't have a gun, then I will try to defend myself in some other way, or I might not try to defend myself. I might run away instead when the attack comes. And so what actions and options occur to me is going to depend on what technologies I have. On the other hand, today, how do people get their news, for example? A lot of people get their news from social media. They scroll down and they see posts from their friends. Maybe the friends highlight some news story. Maybe there's some part of the algorithm that's going to highlight things for you. So your worldview might be very much affected by which social media site are you using. Are you using social media or not? I mean, there, of course, are some people who are not users of social media. They get their news from other sources. And so that might affect how they think about world events, etc. So all of a sudden, this idea that technology is a mere tool that is value neutral is starting to look a little bit questionable. Actually, it influences the values that we have. It influences the way we see the world, and the technologies we use to influence what actions we see as open to us. And so a lot of philosophers, social scientists, and others who've studied technology think that it's misleading to say that technology is a mere tool. And also, to go back to AI, these days, when people are talking with AI, you have chatbots, you can speak with them. Some people start regarding the chatbot as a kind of person. Every day I have students or colleagues that say, well, when I speak with my chatbot, I say please and thank you. I treat the chatbot with a certain amount of politeness, as if it's a person on the other end. And so if you have a tool that is a kind of person that, let's say it's experienced as a kind of person, you might ask, well, what if the chatbot is not polite when it speaks back to you? What if it's rude? Is that a moral mistake that it's making, or is it just an engineering mistake? Do I have any obligations towards these technologies, etc.? So all of a sudden, the technology might be experienced as something very different than a mere tool, namely as a kind of person, as a new kind of entity, as a new kind of social presence. Of course, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. It's just a technology, and they might be right. However, a very wide range of people have these kinds of human reactions when they interact with these human-like tools. And so all of a sudden, the idea that it's just a value-neutral tool is starting to look less plausible.
Dr. Sven, how do technologies like self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, and social media challenge traditional ethical frameworks? Do these technologies require a new way of thinking about morality?
I think they do, because in traditional ethical thinking, it's been assumed that the people who have duties towards other people and that have obligations and that can treat each other more or less well are going to be human beings. And so you and I are having a conversation, and that's a very nice thing to do. We could also be fighting with one another. And then even in that case, there would be some ethical rules for, just war theory, etc. That's a long tradition. All of these traditions, whether it's, the ancient Greeks thinking about ethics, whether it's the Indian tradition of thinking about ethics, etc., would assume, that human beings are the main, what philosophers call moral agents and moral patients. What does that mean? That means the moral agent is the one that acts. I'm trying to follow certain moral rules. I try to be a virtuous and good person, may sometimes achieve this, may sometimes fail to live up to the ethical standards there are in my society. But then on the receiving end of my actions is the moral patient. If I'm treating you with respect and concern, then I'm recognizing your status as what philosophers call a moral patient, someone who can be treated well or poorly, rightly or wrongly. Now, this is the traditional way of thinking about ethics. But you mentioned self-driving cars, for example. Well, in San Francisco, there are self-driving cars without humans in them. They used to be illegal in most places in the world. Now there are taxi services that you might order one of these taxis. It will come and pick you up. And before you get into the car, it's, maybe you're standing by the curb and like waiting for the car and the car's approaching you. Well, now it's, you're a moral patient. We don't want the car to hit you. And actually the self-driving car is now a moral agent. It's supposed to act in a way that respects your status as someone whose well-being matters and who should be respected. So suddenly we have sort of AI human interaction. Now, given that there are self-driving cars without drivers in them, or passengers, I should perhaps say, in San Francisco, there will also be situations where two self-driving cars will meet each other on the road. There's no human there. And then you can ask, well, how should they interact? Maybe they should follow certain rules. And there's a funny anecdote that I like to tell where in August of last year, people were woken up in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. in the morning because self-driving cars were driving around honking at each other. And so there was a parking lot for only these self-driving cars. And one of the ways that they coordinate their parking is that they will honk so that they can sort of, actually it was a fluke or some sort of mistake and they try to fix it. But for the moment, they were coordinating by honking at each other. And then as a result, people sleeping were woken up and disturbed by this. The peace was disturbed. And so there you have a kind of AI interaction. And so you can ask for these three cases: human-human interaction, what should the ethical rules be? Human-AI interaction, let's say a self-driving car interacting with a person, what should the rules be there? And then maybe AI interaction, two self-driving cars, two chatbots, what rules should they follow? Actually, a lot of the big tech companies these days are envisioning what they call advanced AI assistants, sometimes called agents, AI agents. And basically, these are supposed to be personal assistants that book train tickets for us or flight tickets or airfare, whatever, that arrange meetings. So you and I had an appointment to meet now at this hour and have this discussion. Perhaps two AI assistants, one working for you, one working for me, so to speak, could have coordinated that on our behalf. Now, when our AI assistants are interacting, they don't have to worry about hurting the other's feelings, so to speak, because they don't have feelings yet, presumably. And so the kind of ethical rules that apply to discussion between you and me, I mean, we have to be careful of each other's vulnerability, our irreplaceability as a human being. We can't just replace you with another person and it's going to be equally good now because you're a unique individual and you matter in your own right. With AI agents, they're not vulnerable in the same way, they're not irreplaceable. And so if they should follow ethical rules, they should maybe follow different ones than the ones that. So we really need to rethink and update our ethical rules so that it's sort of well functioning in a world with AI, with robots and new types of agents and perhaps even patients. People sometimes say, well, we're not far away, some people believe, from building conscious AI systems, if they're right. And some of the big tech companies even have what they call AI welfare researchers. How can we make sure that our AI technologies are not conscious? And if they are, do we then suddenly have duties towards them to not hurt their feelings, to not cause them pain and suffering? So definitely we need new ethical frameworks for the new age of AI and technology.
Very insightful. The book explores the concept of merging with the technologies we use. Do you think this merging is inevitable, or should we strive to maintain a clear distinction between humans and machines?
Oh, that's another exciting question. Indeed, I devote a whole chapter to it in the book. The last chapter of the book, actually, because this is a little bit futuristic. On the other hand, there are already technologies that we merge with. I mean, for example, there are pacemakers, technology put into people's hearts. There are brain stimulation technologies, for example, deep brain stimulation. These are electrodes that are placed within the brain that give off electronic signals that help to stimulate brain activity. Now, those are very obvious examples of sort of merging with technology because the technologies are built into our bodies. You might also ask, well, what if I always use, as most people do, I always carry my smartphone around and I use it to get around, like, if I want to get from A to B, I used to look at maps. Now I look at my, directions on the phone. Have I now merged with the technology, even though it's not, the smartphone has not been built into my brain yet. But still, I form a kind of system with my smartphone because together with it, I can do new things that I couldn't do without it. And then in a certain sense, there's at least a kind of functional, you might call it, merging, so that I now become a kind of system. With one part of the system is me, another part of the system is my iPhone, or it could be pen and paper. Maybe if I'm a very skilled mathematician, I don't need a calculator. I do it by hand with pen and paper. It's still there. I in a certain looser sense, I've merged with technology. So that case is not very scary. It's not very futuristic. We don't have to worry, so to speak. But when we start building the technologies into our bodies, and that might give us new abilities, some of which may be good, some of which may be bad. There might be side effects. Actually, some of these people who have brain stimulation technologies have experienced side effects on their personality. So some Parkinson's patients that have a lot of tremors, and they haven't been able successfully to, the doctors treating them to control their tremors using brain stimulation technologies. But sometimes there are also personality changes so that the person becomes, let's say, more impulsive or something like that. Well, here we start, we have to really think, is it worth it? Interestingly enough, sometimes the patient says, yes, I'm happy, I don't have tremors anymore. The family members might say, well, you've also become impulsive, and we're not sure we like that. We want the old you to come back and so on. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. I think it's, well, there are some colleagues, philosophers, who say that we've always merged with technology, whether it's sort of more old-fashioned. I mean, we're wearing clothes in a certain sense. We walk around, shielded by clothes, and we were warmed by the clothes we wear, etc. So, without the clothes, we would maybe, not go out so much. There would be, too much sun, and it would be too cold, etc. So there's nothing new of, becoming a kind of system, so to speak, that where certain pieces of technology, in this case, clothes, help us to do things we couldn't otherwise do, or pen and paper, or whatever technologies. So there's nothing new about the idea that we expand our abilities to act in the world with the help of technology. But it gets more scary when we start using AI, when we start using computers, and we start building those computers into the body. Then we really start feeling that, wow, this is something that we have to think about very carefully. And so in a certain sense, an old topic, but these days more pressing and more scary.
One of the thought-provoking questions in your book is what a self-driving car should do if it detects an unavoidable crash. So how do you approach this ethical dilemma, and what factors should influence decision-making in such situations?
Yeah, so back to the self-driving cars. I mean, like, I love talking about self-driving cars because they're so interesting from the point of view of technology ethics. Because again, they have to operate in the world, sharing a world with us human beings, and they're supposed to be working for us, so to speak. But there are, of course, going to be situations, and unfortunately, there have already been a number of situations in the real world where things get dangerous, where people's lives are at risk. And sadly, indeed, a few people have been killed because self-driving cars, either they've been sitting in the self-driving car and the self-driving car has crashed and the person in the car has died. That started happening already in 2016, I think it was. And then the earliest time that happened. And then people have been hit and killed by self-driving cars. That I think the first time that happened was in 2018, if I remember correctly. And so then the question is, how should these cars handle those kinds of scenarios? One approach would be to say that, well, you should ask the people sitting in the car, like, what would they prefer the car to do? However, I mean, this might be a car that they're renting as part of some sort of taxi service. And so, once, I maybe am using the taxi service and I go from to the grocery store, and then it drives off and it picks up you. And then perhaps you and I have different preferences for how the car is supposed to behave in a dangerous scenario. Maybe I'm a very for me, the only thing that matters is how I'm doing, and I just want to save my life. Doesn't matter how many other people are harmed. Maybe you are much more altruistic. You're willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. Let's say, well, then maybe the car should behave in one way when I'm riding in the car, and maybe in another way when you're riding in the car. So that would be one approach: just ask the passenger, so to speak, what they would prefer. This may not be good because maybe you are a terrorist. And what you prefer would be that the car that you're riding in would drive into a mass of people. I mean, maybe you also want to kill yourself, and that's why you're also riding in the car. Otherwise, you could maybe send off the self-driving car without having to sit in it. So obviously, the people using the cars, or maybe people hacking the cars, a terrorist could hack into a car and make the car act in some bad ways. So this idea that people should just decide this doesn't seem to be a very good idea. Here too, we might return to the ethical tradition and ask, what would Aristotle say? What would, Immanuel Kant say about this, or Plato, or whoever? But then we get back to that problem we talked about before, that, well, they were writing long ago in a time when there were no self-driving cars, when there were no AI agents that had to make moral decisions. So, and as we said, we might need new ethical values and ideas. And so that's something to take into account. Of course, it shouldn't be all together different from our more traditional ideas. I mean, we're still going to care about things such as people's well-being, are people being respected, etc. So we can of course learn a little bit from traditional ethical theories, but we can also do other things. I mean, we can ask, for example, well, what if I'm riding in a self-driving car here in Germany, where I'm located, and I go across the border to some other country, to Switzerland or to Austria, and they have slightly different traffic rules. In Germany, on the Autobahn, for example, you can drive as fast as you like, that you cannot do in, let's say, the Netherlands, another country that's also bordering Germany. Then the car has to also be sensitive to traffic rules and laws and regulations. So that, of course, is sort of a outer framework, but still within the law, there's usually a lot of room for different decisions to be made. And yeah, I think it's still an open question. I think, you can also ask people what would they prefer if they are riding in the car on the one hand, if other people are riding in a self-driving car, what rules should the car follow? Interestingly enough, some researchers have done this, and they've found that people have different preferences depending on whether they're sitting in the car or whether they're on the street. They want the car that they're sitting in to protect the person riding in the car at all cost. And they want, if they're walking, crossing a street, or they're out on their bike, then they want the self-driving cars that other people are riding in to try to minimize overall harm. So just asking people what preferences they have, that's also complicated. So it's still an open question, and you have to, I think, look at many different considerations. What does traditional ethical ideals say? What does the law say? What are people's preferences? What are people willing to use? Am I willing to ride in a car that has certain ethical principles? Am I not willing to ride in other ones? These are just some of the things we need. We might also need new methods to thinking about this. Maybe we should even ask the self-driving car, because maybe it has advanced AI that can help us think about this. I mean, we shouldn't exclude that we could also get some input from the AI technologies that we're using. In the end, it's a human decision, but we need all the help we can get. And so, yeah. Great question.
Dr. Sven, can robots or AI systems possess morally relevant properties? And how should we treat artificial intelligence and robots ethically, given that they are increasingly integrated into our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one can distinguish between three different kinds of questions. So one would be, could a robot or an AI technology really, for example, feel pain, feel pleasure, be happy, be sad? Could it have preferences? Could it have a will that we should respect? Could it consent or not consent to certain kinds of treatment? If that all were true, then you could say that, yes, there are some ethical rules that should apply to how you treat a robot. Maybe you have to ask permission before you treat it in a certain way. Maybe you have to be careful so you don't hurt its feelings or cause it pain and suffering, and so on and so forth. There are, as I mentioned before, people who take this very seriously. There are AI welfare researchers at some of the big tech companies. There are colleagues in philosophy and computer science, etc., who are investigating under what circumstances could you have conscious machines that are, behave in a certain sense in a human-like way. But let's go to behavior then. I mean, you could have a machine that behaves as if it feels pain, as if it's happy, as if it consents to something or not. But really, what's going on inside of the machine might be extremely different to what's going on inside of a human being. So there might not be any subjective experience of suffering there or of happiness, etc. And yet the technology might behave as if it has these moral properties. Then does that matter? I mean, there are colleagues in philosophy and other fields that say, yeah, I mean, when I interact with you, I I can only see your outward behavior. Perhaps you're a zombie, but I should assume that maybe when you're smiling that you're happy, or maybe when you're crying that you're sad. And so the only thing I have to go on, and I have a colleague and friend called John Danaher who takes this view, is your outward behavior. Other researchers, myself included, say that, well, yes, that's interesting, but if there's really nothing going on the inside and it's just faking it, so to speak, then there's a very big difference between you and the zombie version of you. A third possible approach is that, yeah, well, there's a symbolism here. And so if I create a robot or an AI avatar and it looks like you, and then I'm impolite or rude or even violent towards that AI copy of you or robot copy of you, well, presumably you would feel that it's a kind of personal attack on you. I mean, and a famous example is Scarlett Johansson, the actress. I mean, so she was asked by OpenAI, could you be the voice of our new AI assistant? And she actually thought about it and said, no, I don't want to. And then they created a voice that sounded a lot like hers. They denied that it was based on her voice, but a lot of people who heard this, including Scarlett Johansson, felt that, yes, they're trying to imitate my voice. And she felt that she was somehow being violated, her wishes were not respected, etc. And so the AI there was a kind of representation or symbol of her. And then she felt that that was problematic. Now, if you're nice to the bot that sounds like Scarlett Johansson, is that being nice to her, or is that also weird? I mean, like if I make a robot copy of you and I want it to be my new best friend, I want the robot copy of you to move in with me and we're going to watch movies together and have it nice. That can seem also like a very strange thing. So there's a kind of symbolism in in creating AI and robots that resemble humans, and that can already make a difference to how it's appropriate to interact with these technologies, even if you don't think that the technology itself can be better or worse off, that you can do something good or bad towards it. Indirectly, humans may be affected by how we treat technologies as well.
Social media technologies have dramatically changed how we interact online. How do you view the ethical implications of online behavior, and what responsibility do tech companies bear in shaping ethical online spaces?
Yes, I mean, I think that's raises a whole range of different interesting and difficult issues. I mean, on the one hand, as I said before, like the social media and other types of online spaces we use, they influence what kind of content we're exposed to. This can be for the good. It can also be problematic. It can radicalize, let's say, young people who are frustrated and are looking for some sort of outlet. And then they find like-minded people, or they find people who take advantage of their frustration, and that maybe influence these young people to perform acts of violence or maybe even terror attacks, etc. So that's one thing that, of course, the tech companies have to, and they do, of course, care about this, and they're trying to take steps, but it's not so easy, because at the same time, some of the other features that they want to use to sort of, to keep people on the websites and to draw them in and to make it engaging could be some of the same things that could lead someone to become radicalized. So this is one issue. Another thing, of course, is today with the large language models and chatbots and things like that are so good at imitating human speech and writing. When you go online these days, the whole internet is a little bit like a big Turing test. And so, Alan Turing in the 50s had this idea that if you can build a computer that sounds as if it's a human speaking or writing text, then you can say that this computer is thinking. And that's the imitation game, or as Turing himself called it, or the Turing test as it's become to be known. Now that we have chatbots, large language models, generative AI that produce outputs that sound human-like, and people can use this to put content online. You never know, like when you go online, am I writing text that was written actually word for word, sentence for sentence by a human? Am I writing something that was created based on a prompt put in by a human and that was then generated by some sort of a language model? Or what exactly is it that I'm reading online? If you go on social media, am I seeing an actual person, or is it a fake counterfeit person, as Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, called it? Actually, speaking of Daniel Dennett, there was an experiment where a chatbot was trained to sound like him. So he's someone who's written many books starting in the 1960s. He just died last year after a very long career. And with his consent, just before his death, some researchers trained a chatbot on his writings and fine-tuned it. And indeed, it sounded exactly like him. Even people who had read a lot of his books had trouble telling the outputs of this chatbot apart from the real outputs newly written by Daniel Dennett. And so you could have AI technologies not just imitating some imaginary person, but it could be imitating you, let's say. So maybe your friends start getting text messages or emails, and it sounds like you, but they're actually being deceived into thinking that it's you. It's really some chatbot, etc. So we have to worry about, these days, are we talking with real people? Are we talking with robots? Are our discussions with real people being influenced by the technologies so that we, without our realizing it, are maybe pushed into certain extreme networks or whatever it might be? So yeah, there's quite a few questions, and of course there are many opportunities. Social media is great, and it you and I contacted each other via social media and having this nice discussion. So obviously there's lots of opportunity there, and it's all very exciting. But on the other hand, it's a double-edged sword, and so we also have to think about those more scary sides of it.
Dr. Sven, you also discuss how emerging technologies affect traditional ideas about ethics and human self-understanding. How do these technologies challenge our understanding of what it means to be human in the modern age?
Yeah, I think this is actually not something that is new in a certain sense, because when the book came along, people were starting to think, is the brain a little bit like a book? Are there sentences written in the brain that when I have a memory, I sort of access those pages of that book? When the computer came along, people started comparing human beings to computers. Earlier than that, when machines started becoming more advanced, the human body was compared to a machine. I mean, for example, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, around the time of the English Revolution, and that at age of the machine age was starting, so to speak. He and others started comparing the body and the brain to a machine, a machinery, a mechanism. And these days, people are starting to think, well, maybe we are a little bit like the machine learning systems. And so maybe we're just probabilistic computers of a kind of a machine learning type. Maybe that's all we are. So whenever this new technology, there's always a temptation to think that, well, maybe this technology is actually a simpler version of us. So our technological and scientific understanding of things outside of ourselves they tend to be reflected back onto how we think about ourselves. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are also some traditional ideas of what is specifically human. For example, the ability to speak, the ability to feel pain, the ability to perceive. But as we've said, we have, at the very least, we have technologies that can imitate speech, chatbots and other generative AI technologies. We have technologies with sensors and cameras on them. They seem to have a kind of, when one talks about computer vision, of course, that's something different than human eyesight. But it's it works in a similar kind of way. Like you can present an object to a computer vision system, and it can identify it as being a cat or a dog or an apple or a pear or whatever it might be. And so, and as we've said a few times, there are now people who are also either trying to develop conscious AI or sentient AI, or who think that this is possible. And so if you think that what is special about us is our ability to speak, our ability to feel, to perceive, to be conscious, and we are now getting closer and closer to machines and technologies that can do these things, then either you have to think that, well, maybe there's nothing very special about humans because that can be reproduced in other technologies. And by the way, animals have a lot of these abilities too. Or you say, we need new ideas about what's special about humans, because we always have this sort of deep wish to identify a feature that is the particularly human thing. I mean, I mentioned Aristotle before. He thinks that we are a kind of animal, but we are the political animal. And so he says that a different thing about humans as compared to animals is that we form communities of citizens, and we have, we're rational and we think, and so we are thinking political animals, and maybe that's a distinctively human thing. But, again, maybe we will have communities of these AI assistants, etc. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, he recently gave an interview where he said that he thinks that very soon there will be more AI agents in the world than human agents. Presumably, they also need to organize themselves in some way or other, and maybe they form a kind of political community. They're not going to be they're not going to be political animals, but they might be political agents or entities of some sort. And so yeah, definitely every age with every new technological development sort of challenges previously existing ideas of what's special about humans. And I think that's not going to stop. It's only going to continue.
Dr. Sven, my last question. For students, researchers, and technology professionals reading your book, what key takeaway would you like them to have when thinking about the ethical challenges posed by emerging technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to distill everything down to one key takeaway, but I think maybe one thing about ethics as a topic that I want to stress is that, and I've talked about all sorts of fears and all sorts of scary aspects of modern technologies, but I've also tried a few times to highlight that, this is also exciting. And so in ethics, we're not only asking what things should be forbid, what technology should we ban and like criticize. We should also think about, what is the kind of future that we would like. You and I talked about the question: should we merge with technologies? Should we sort of connect our brains to the internet or to AI technologies? I mean, maybe it's a good idea. I mean, I have colleagues who think that would be great. There are people in and outside of academic research who are exploring that as a possible future for us human beings. I mean, what are we going to do in a world where AI can take over more and more tasks and jobs from us? How are we going to entertain ourselves? How are we going to make life meaningful for us human beings? And obviously, some of the things that we can do is to use new kinds of technologies to create new kinds of challenges for ourselves, to create new kinds of activities, perhaps new kinds of games, perhaps new kinds of art. And so in technology ethics, let's also think about what we want with moving forward, and not only criticize what has happened well, at the current point in time or in the past. Let's try to also learn from the past and to try to find a path forward to a better and brighter future, and not just worry and see ethics as a negative thing. It also positive, and has to do with what we want and what would be a better world for us human beings.
Thank you, Dr. Sven Nyholm, for joining us today and sharing your expertise on the fascinating and important topic of technology ethics. Your insights have provided us with a deeper understanding of how emerging technologies challenge our ethical frameworks and what we must consider as we navigate the future. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us and look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you very much.